Carter stared at the empty bed, the rumpled sheets where her daughter had slept just hours ago. The air was thick with the smell of burnt toast, the breakfast Zoe had insisted on making herself that morning, a little messy but filled with pride. Selena's heart clenched as she let the silence settle around her, the hum of the house's artificial gravity system, the only sound in the otherwise still room. She had been taking a shower when it happened. Zoe had said she was going to play in the park just outside their small colony home. Nothing unusual. Selena had told her to be back before noon, but when she'd finished, the house was empty. Not even a sign that Zoe had ever been there. A quick scan of the area outside, a call to the local authorities, and the sinking feeling in her chest had only deepened. They'd found no trace of her. The colony, a small but peaceful settlement on the edge of the Ganymede Belt, was supposed to be a haven, a place where Selena and Zoe could escape the horrors of war. But now it felt more like a prison, one that swallowed up her daughter without a trace. The local authorities, bureaucrats more interested in their next promotion than doing their jobs, had barely lifted a finger. Their assumption was simple. Zoe was just another runaway child. They hadn't taken the situation seriously. And why would they? Who would want to kidnap a child from a nowhere planet? It wasn't until the first night passed without any leads that Selena began to feel it. The creeping dread, the gnawing suspicion that something far darker was at play. "Selena, we've checked the area," Officer Matthews said over the comm, his voice thin with impatience. "There's no sign of foul play. It's likely she just wandered off with a friend. Let us know if you need anything else." Selena's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white. She knew this wasn't some simple case of a kid getting lost. Zoe would never wander off without telling her. She was too responsible, too sharp. "Thank you," Selena muttered, cutting the connection. She turned back to the room, her eyes drawn to Zoe's toys scattered on the floor, a few stuffed animals she had left behind in the rush to go outside. The image of her daughter, laughing and carefree, felt like a cruel joke now. Her thoughts spun, then snapped into focus. The years she spent in the military, the training, the combat, the strategies, flooded her mind, and with it came a cold clarity. Whoever had taken Zoe had made a mistake. They had underestimated her. She would find her daughter, no matter what it took. The days stretched on, each one longer than the last, and still, no one had a concrete lead on Zoe's whereabouts. Selena's calls to the local authorities became less polite and more forceful, but each response was the same. "We're doing everything we can." It was always the same, vague promises, empty reassurances. By the time the third week rolled around, Selena's patience had evaporated. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection. Her once calm, collected features were now etched with exhaustion and fury. The quiet civilian life she planned to build with Zoe was slipping away, slipping fast. Selena wasn't the same woman she had been before, the one who turned her back on the military life. She had tried to leave the violence behind. But in the silence of her home, with nothing but the memories of Zoe's laughter filling the empty space, she could no longer deny it. A deep, cold anger began to take root in her. She had given everything for this child, her career, her peace, her future, and now someone had taken her away. Someone, or something, had crossed a line, and Selena Carter would cross it right back. That night, she made the call. "Jacob, it's Selena," she said, her voice tight. "I need your help." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the gruff voice of Commander Jacob Thorne, her former superior and mentor, crackled through. "I thought I'd never hear from you again. What's going on?" "I need to find my daughter, and I need you to help me do it," Selena replied, her voice cold as steel. Jacob sighed heavily, the sound of old wounds in his tone. "You know I can't just give you a ship and a crew, Selena. You left that life behind." "I didn't leave it behind," she snapped, her pulse quickening. "I just thought I could live without it." There was another pause, but this time, it was shorter. Selena knew Jacob well enough to know what was coming next. "I'll send a ship to pick you up," he said. "You'll have a small crew, but I'm not giving you anything bigger than you can manage. Understand?" Selena's chest tightened, but she swallowed her emotions. Understood. The comm line clicked off, and for the first time in weeks, Selena allowed herself to breathe. She had a plan now. She had a way to do something. But it was only the beginning. She wasn't going to wait any longer. The hunt was on. Selena didn't waste any time once Jacob's ship arrived. The Peregrine, a stealth-class vessel built for fast strikes and high-speed evasions, was waiting at the abandoned dock on the outskirts of the colony. It was small, sleek, and lethal, perfect for what she needed. The small crew Jacob sent consisted of 2 seasoned soldiers, Javier and Asha, both former operatives from the same unit Selena had once commanded. Their reputation preceded them, and their willingness to follow Selena's orders without question spoke volumes. But even they couldn't hide their disbelief when they saw her approach the ship, face hardened, her eyes steely with resolve. "You sure about this, Carter?" Javier asked as he loaded a weapon into the ship's armory. "You're not the same person you were when you left the service." "Doesn't matter who I was," Selena replied coldly, her hands clenched into fists. "I'm going to find my daughter, and I'm not coming back without her." Asha, quiet and composed, gave Selena a sharp nod. "We'll follow you, no matter what. Just tell us where to strike." Selena didn't answer right away. Her mind was already miles ahead, calculating, analyzing. She had spent years studying military intelligence, navigating the galaxy's darker underworld. She knew how to track down the impossible. Zoe was out there. Someone had taken her, and she would burn down the stars themselves to find her. The first lead came from a contact in the underworld, a shady information broker named Kaz who owed Selena a favor. He ran a series of encrypted transmissions across darknet channels, all of which were tied to human trafficking rings operating in the outer sectors. But there was a catch. Kaz wanted a small fortune for the data, a payment Selena couldn't afford without risking exposure. "Do I have a choice?" Selena asked when she wired him what she could, hoping the bargain would be enough. Kaz's response was immediate. "Only one. You get in, you get out. But you're going to be hunted the whole way through. You sure you're ready for that?" "I'm ready," Selena muttered, closing the comm line. The first system on their list was a desolate place. Virox 9, a mining world turned black market hub. If Zoe had been trafficked through here, there would be traces. Selena felt a cold chill settle in her bones as the Peregrine entered the atmosphere, a grim sense of inevitability settling over her. The government, the Federation, they all turned a blind eye to places like this, where everything had a price. They landed in a dark alleyway, far from prying eyes. The crew moved swiftly, blending into the shadows. Selena's training kicked in, her pulse steady. The world was noisy and grim, full of lowlifes and desperate faces, but it was here she would begin her search. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice a razor edge. "We don't trust anyone here." As they ventured deeper into the criminal underbelly of Virox 9, Selena's mind raced, locking onto every possible lead. She was hunting now, and she wasn't going to stop until she had answers. Every face, every turn in the maze of dark streets felt like a step closer to her daughter. And no matter how far it took her, Selena Carter was ready for what came next. The neon lights of Virox 9 flickered like the pulse of a dying star as Selena and her team made their way deeper into the black market district. The air was thick with the acrid scent of engine grease and unwashed bodies, a far cry from the pristine, regulated life she'd left behind. It was here, in the fringes of the galaxy, that the real business happened. And now, it was her business. They had tracked down the first lead to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, a place notorious for housing trafficked goods. Selena's gut told her they were close, but she kept her emotions in check. In this world, anger would get them killed. Focus was everything. Inside the warehouse, the air was damp and stale, the faint echo of footsteps on metal floors their only sound. Selena's heart beat in steady rhythm, her hand resting on the grip of her plasma sidearm, ready for whatever came next. Asha and Javier moved silently beside her, their eyes scanning every shadow. But it was the low hum of a hidden energy field that caught Selena's attention. "They're here," she whispered, her voice hard as stone. "Set up a perimeter." They moved in tighter formation, the rusted, forgotten machinery of the warehouse looming like silent witnesses. At the far end of the room, under a flickering light, stood a lone figure, a middle-aged man with slicked back hair and a too-perfect suit. Kaz had come through. "You're late," the man sneered, stepping forward. "I thought you'd have more of a sense of urgency, considering your little girl's missing." Selena's eyes narrowed. She didn't need him to remind her. "What do you know about the trafficking ring that runs through here?" The man shrugged nonchalantly. "Everything and nothing. Depends on how much you're willing to pay." Asha stepped forward, her eyes cold. "You want to keep playing games, or do you want to help her find her daughter?" Kaz gave a sly grin. "You don't understand. This isn't just about your daughter, sweetheart. This is bigger than you." His grin deepened, teeth flashing. "But sure, I'll play along for a moment. The auction's tomorrow. You'll find what you're looking for then. A ship's waiting at the docks to take you there." "Who's running it?" Selena demanded, her voice a whip crack. Kaz held up his hands. "I don't know, but they're powerful. If you're looking for her, you're going to need help. You'll need more than just a few guns and some petty criminals." He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You're going to need an army." Selena's jaw clenched. She had already come too far to turn back now. The thought of being outmatched, of walking into a situation where she was no longer in control, lit a fire in her chest. "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel. "Get us to that ship." The ship docked on the outskirts of an isolated, forgotten moon, its surface scarred with craters from old mining operations. The Peregrine glided into the shadow of a crumbling spaceport, its stealth systems ensuring no one would detect their presence. Selena's heart pounded in her chest as she stood at the airlock, every muscle tense. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was the beginning of something far bigger than she'd anticipated, and the real fight was about to begin. Kaz's cryptic warning echoed in her mind. "You'll need an army." As they disembarked, Asha and Javier remained close, both scanning the surroundings with sharp, practiced eyes. They weren't just up against small-time criminals anymore. Selena could feel it. This was different. There were too many precautions, too many layers of security. The trafficking ring wasn't a rogue operation. It was a well-organized machine, and it had ties to some of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. People with influence, money, and power. People who wouldn't hesitate to bury her if they had to. She couldn't let them. The information from Kaz had led them to an old Imperial cargo freighter hidden deep inside a dilapidated docking bay. It was heavily guarded, and as Selena approached it, the first hint of unease crept in. This wasn't a simple smuggling operation. It was something far more dangerous. The ship, built for transporting large goods, was being used to move children, slaves, across the galaxy for the highest bidder. "I'll hack the mainframe," Asha said, her fingers already moving across a datapad. She was the tech expert, quick with systems, and able to find weak points where others saw only solid security. "I'll shut down their sensors so we can get in unnoticed." "You have 10 minutes, Selena ordered, her voice low and firm. Javier kept watch, his gaze darting between the ship and the surrounding spaceport. The air felt thick, oppressive, like a storm waiting to break. Selena's thoughts drifted briefly to Zoe, wherever she was, whatever she was going through. But she pushed the thoughts away. She couldn't afford distractions now. As Asha worked, Selena's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The auction. It was happening on this moon, right under the noses of the Galactic authorities. Whoever was running it had the kind of resources that made the Federation's military look like amateurs. This wasn't just a crime syndicate. It was a well-funded operation that had infiltrated the very institutions that were supposed to protect people like Zoe. Asha's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're in." Selena didn't hesitate. She led the charge, storming up the ramp of the freighter, her pulse quickening with every step. Behind her, Asha and Javier moved like shadows, each of them a trained weapon. They were entering the heart of the beast now. The time for stealth was over. As they descended into the belly of the freighter, the quiet was suffocating. Selena's grip tightened on her sidearm, her instincts screaming that they were about to encounter something far worse than they'd imagined. This wasn't just a trafficking ring. It was a war, and Selena was walking straight into its epicenter. The interior of the freighter was dark and cold, the kind of sterile environment where life was kept at a distance. The low hum of the ship's engines echoed through the long metallic corridors, and the smell of old machinery mixed with the faint scent of fear. Selena's boots echoed with every step, but her team moved silently behind her. They had no choice, no time to waste. Asha kept her datapad in hand, tapping away to bypass security checkpoints as they ventured deeper into the ship's lower levels. They passed empty cargo bays, their contents either stripped bare or covered in dust. The further they moved, the more they felt like intruders, like they were trespassing in a place that didn't belong to them. "I'm starting to see encrypted comms traffic," Asha muttered, her face illuminated by the pale light of the screen. "This is bad, Selena, really bad. This is a secure military-grade encryption. Whoever's running this operation has resources we can't even begin to imagine." Selena didn't respond. She couldn't afford to get distracted by the growing realization that they were up against something far bigger than any trafficking ring. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Whoever these people were, they had already played their hand. But they weren't the only players in this game. Javier's voice broke the silence. "We've got company." Selena's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the grip. She motioned for Asha and Javier to take cover behind a stack of crates, her eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway ahead. 2 guards appeared around the corner, rifles slung over their shoulders, their eyes scanning the hall with professional indifference. They didn't see Selena and her team as a threat. Not yet. But that would change in an instant. "On my count," Selena whispered, her voice barely audible. 3, 2, 1. In one smooth motion, Selena leaped from cover, her pistol raised. The guards didn't even have time to react. The first guard crumpled to the floor with a silenced shot to the head. The second went down just as quickly, his own weapon falling to the ground with a metallic clatter. Asha immediately moved to their bodies, stripping them of comms gear and weapons. Javier stayed alert, watching for any more movement. "They'll have heard that," Asha said, her voice tight with urgency. "We don't have much time before the whole ship knows we're here." "Then let's move faster," Selena replied, her jaw set. "We need to find out where they're holding the kids." The deeper they went into the ship, the more it became clear that this wasn't just an isolated operation. The walls, once cold and sterile, now felt like a maze, an intricate web of power, secrecy, and money. Whoever was pulling the strings here had connections in the highest echelons of galactic society. Selena's instincts told her that they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than any cartel or criminal syndicate. It wasn't until they reached the central docking bay that the full scale of the operation revealed itself. Rows upon rows of cages, each holding a terrified, wide-eyed child, their faces pale and gaunt. Some were as young as 5, others barely old enough to walk. The realization hit Selena like a fist to the gut. This wasn't just human trafficking. It was a black market child auction, and it was happening right under the Federation's nose. As her eyes scanned the room, her breath caught. She saw her daughter. Zoe was among them. But she wasn't alone. Several high-ranking figures in pristine suits stood nearby, casually inspecting the children as if they were nothing more than livestock. And at the center of it all, a man in a military uniform, one she recognized, a Federation officer, one of the very people who had promised to protect her. The betrayal was unbearable. "Selena," Javier murmured, his voice grim. "You need to see this. Now." Selena turned, her mind racing. If the Federation was involved in this, if they were the ones behind the trafficking, then everything she had believed in, everything she had fought for, was a lie. Her jaw clenched with fury. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. This was war. This section reveals the horrifying scale of the trafficking operation and the devastating betrayal of the Federation. Selena's discovery that Zoe is among the children auctioned off not only raises the personal stakes, but reveals the depth of corruption she's up against. This twist forces her to reckon with the reality that she's now fighting an entire system. Selena stood frozen for a moment, her gaze fixed on Zoe. Her heart pounded in her chest, a furious, primal beat that drowned out all other sounds. Her daughter was right there, not a few meters away, in the hands of the same people who had promised to protect her. Zoe was dirty, pale, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, but she was alive. That was all that mattered, for now. But the sight of the Federation officer standing so casually among the bidders, inspecting the children like they were cattle to be sold to the highest bidder, filled Selena with a fury unlike anything she had ever known. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. This was systemic corruption on a galactic scale. "Stay low," she whispered to Asha and Javier, her voice barely audible but full of conviction. "We take out the guards first. No one gets to touch my daughter." Without waiting for confirmation, she moved, her body a blur of trained precision. Asha and Javier were right behind her, their footsteps silent but swift. They moved like ghosts through the shadows of the central docking bay, avoiding the patrols and circling the perimeter. Selena's eyes never left Zoe. But then, a voice broke through the silence. Well, what do we have here?" Selena's blood ran cold. The voice was unmistakable. It was Captain Darius Quinn, an old acquaintance from her days in the military. He was no friend. Quinn was one of the Federation's most decorated officers, and he was known for his ruthless efficiency. If anyone knew the ins and outs of the Federation's Black Ops programs, it was him. "You?" Selena spat, her voice low but full of venom. "You're behind this." Quinn smirked, stepping closer to her with the casual confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "It's not what you think, Carter. You've been away too long. The galaxy isn't what it used to be. These children," he motioned vaguely toward the cages, "are commodities. Power is shifting. You should understand that." Selena clenched her fists. She had always known there were dark corners within the Federation, but she had never imagined it would go this far. Quinn's eyes flicked over to Zoe, and for a split second, a cold gleam of recognition flashed across his face. "She's the one, isn't she?" Quinn said, his grin widening. "You're going to try and stop all this for one little girl. How quaint." Rage surged through Selena, blinding her to everything except Quinn's smug expression. She took a step forward, her hand drawing her sidearm with lightning speed, but before she could squeeze the trigger, Ash's voice cut through the tension. "Selena, wait. We're not alone." The sound of boots pounding the metal floor reached her ears just as a half-dozen more Federation soldiers entered the bay, their rifles raised. Quinn's grin faded, and his eyes narrowed as he gestured for them to lower their weapons. "Take them down," he ordered, his tone cold. Without hesitation, the soldiers opened fire. Selena dove behind a crate, her pulse racing, but she was already moving. Asha and Javier had already split off, using the chaos to their advantage. The first soldier to appear in Selena's line of sight went down with a shot to the chest. A quick scan, 2 more on the left. She squeezed off 2 more rounds before ducking again, the force of the recoil steadying her. Move, Javier yelled, his voice cutting through the gunfire as he flanked left, his rifle spitting precision shots into the Federation soldiers. But Selena wasn't thinking about the soldiers anymore. She wasn't thinking about the gunfire or the chaos. All she could focus on was Zoe, and the seconds that were slipping away as Quinn's men closed in. She peeked around the corner, eyes locked on the cage where Zoe was being moved toward the back of the bay. Her daughter was being pushed roughly by a guard, her face streaked with tears. The sight tore at Selena's heart, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. Not now. With a growl of determination, Selena launched herself from cover, her sidearm raised. "Zoe," she shouted, her voice raw. "I'm coming for you." But Quinn was faster. He lunged forward, shoving one of his soldiers aside as he reached for the control panel that locked the cage. Selena's stomach dropped. If he activated it, the lockdown would seal the children inside, and it would be even harder to get to them. "No," Selena screamed. But it was already too late. Quinn's hand slammed against the panel, and the lock clicked into place. The doors of the cage slid shut with a mechanical hiss, and the children were locked in, out of her reach. A desperate, primal rage exploded within Selena, and everything else disappeared. She wasn't just fighting for Zoe anymore. She was fighting for every one of them. She wasn't going to let Quinn or anyone else get away with this. Not this time. Not ever again. This part heightens the tension, revealing the full scope of the betrayal and Selena's desperation. Quinn's personal involvement in the trafficking operation is a devastating twist, and it pushes Selena over the edge, turning her focus from just Zoe to a full-on war against the system. The action is intense, but Selena's unwavering determination is the core of this scene, setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation. The sound of Selena's pulse pounding in her ears drowned out everything else. She didn't even register the blaring alarms or the crack of gunfire as she sprinted across the bay toward Zoe's cage. Captain Quinn's laughter echoed behind her, cold and mocking, but she couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when Zoe was so close. "Zoe." Selena's voice was raw, desperate, as she reached the locked cage. Her daughter was staring at her through the bars, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her eyes widened in recognition, but fear quickly replaced the flicker of hope. "Mom," Zoe whispered, her voice trembling. "Hold on," Selena yelled as she fumbled with the sidearm in her hand, the cool metal of the gun clutched in a vice grip. The lock on the cage was heavy-duty, designed to withstand even the most sophisticated hacking attempts. But there was no time for finesse. Selena didn't care about finesse. She fired. The shot rang out, the explosive force of the blast splitting the lock in an instant. Zoe recoiled as the door slid open, but Selena was already pulling her out of the cage, her arms wrapping around her daughter in a tight protective embrace. "You're safe," Selena whispered, brushing the matted hair from Zoe's face, trying to ignore the raw panic in her chest. "You're safe now." But the moment was short-lived. The sound of boots clanging against metal floors grew louder. Quinn had activated his comms, and reinforcements were already on their way. "Mom, what's happening?" Zoe gasped, her small hands clutching Selena's jacket, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "We're getting out of here," Selena said, her voice a steely promise. She turned to Asha and Javier, who were taking out guards in swift, calculated movements, but the numbers were overwhelming. They needed to leave. Now. Javier's voice crackled over the comms. "Selena, they're about to lock down the whole bay. We need to move or we're trapped in here." "Where's the exit?" Selena demanded. Asha, her face grim, pointed toward a large maintenance door at the far side of the bay. "Through there. It leads to the secondary hangar. If we're lucky, we'll have a few minutes before they seal it." "Let's move," Selena shouted, grabbing Zoe's hand and pulling her toward the door. The sound of more soldiers converging on their position echoed behind them. They reached the door just as it began to close, but Asha was already at the terminal, hacking the lock with her usual speed. With a sharp hiss, the door slid open, and they rushed through, the sound of approaching soldiers growing ever louder. The secondary hangar was smaller but still functional, with a few old freighters parked in the dim light. But it wasn't the ships that Selena was focused on. It was the escape route. Another tunnel leading to a hidden exit, one she hoped would get them to safety. "Move fast," Selena barked. "Javier, Asha, clear the path. Zoe, stay close." They ran, but just as they reached the tunnel entrance, Quinn's voice boomed through the comm system. "I don't think you understand, Carter," Quinn sneered, his voice chilling in its calm. "This isn't over. You've made a mistake." Selena didn't respond. She didn't have to. She was already thinking ahead. The fight wasn't just about escaping this station. It wasn't just about Zoe. It was about bringing Quinn down, taking down everything he stood for. The tunnel curved, leading them deeper into the moon's belly. And as they reached the final junction, a ship, smaller than the Peregrine, but just as fast, was waiting for them. Its pilot, a contact Selena had made before leaving the Federation, was already in the cockpit, ready to take off. "Let's go," the pilot shouted, throwing open the hatch. Without a second thought, Selena shoved Zoe into the ship, followed quickly by Asha and Javier. The ship's engines roared to life, and they were off, blasting out of the moon's gravity well before the Federation had even realized they were gone. But as they broke through the atmosphere, Selena didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. She had Zoe now. But Quinn, and the system he represented, was still out there. And that meant this war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This final part sees the culmination of Selena's quest, with a successful rescue, but it also sets up a new conflict. While they've escaped, the larger battle against corruption, betrayal, and the Federation's dark secrets is just beginning. Selena's journey from mother to warrior has only begun, and she now has the most personal reason to bring Quinn and his cohorts to justice. The tension between victory and the looming, unfinished war leaves the door wide open for future battles.